The first segment of the podcast, The Connect, where we explore issues and headlines that we've already covered previously, but there's been a new development that has made the headlines yet again. And the first article today is from The Conversation.
The World Health Organization says we shouldn't bother with artificial sweeteners for weight loss or health. Is sugar better?
On a previous episode of the podcast, we talked about the artificial sweetener erythritol.
That's right.
Which has been linked to
increased risk of clotting.
Clotting specifically. So
cardiovascular risk.
Artificial sweeteners as a whole, not necessarily bad, but erythritol, which is a type of artificial sweetener, has been linked to blood clotting disorders.
That's correct.
Or an increased risk
That's right.
of blood clotting factors. And now the WHO on top of that has launched this finding, which is kind of like a meta-analysis where they looked across all the studies into artificial sweeteners to make a comment to say, look, is it a suitable replacement for weight loss or your health overall? And the systematic review here is quite interesting because what they did was they looked at very specific subsets of studies into artificial sweeteners and their effect on health, randomized controlled trials, prospective cohort studies, and case control studies. You're a manager of clinical research. Can you walk me through what these trials are supposed to represent very quickly? Very quickly.
So randomized control is when you have a number of different groups and there's some kind of intervention that's happening, being treated or being given some kind of supplement versus a group that's not. And the participants are randomly assigned to the different groups.
Hence, randomized
That's
control.
right.
I'm starting to get it. Okay, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Prospective cohort studies, what is that?
So that's when they're looking at a particular risk factor in a cohort or a group of people. And then you can make some kind of educated guesses, but you can't necessarily make a causal association. So, I mean, the big one here is when we talk about smoking and lung cancer. It's not really ethical to have people in a study smoke a bunch of cigarettes and see if down the track they develop lung cancer. It's more that you would study a cohort of people containing smokers and non-smokers and then look over time if they're more at risk of developing those particular cancers, for example. Can't say causally exactly, but we can make a very educated guess that there's likely a link between the things that we're investigating.
So the groups are not randomized.
That's right.
You go into looking for these cohorts. You try and control for all the variables as best you can.
That's right. And it can be difficult to do across a group of people. They're not the same. You'll have a number of different factors. And while you try and control for them all, you may not be able to control for everything, or there might be a particular variable or difference between the groups that you may not have accounted for.
10 out of 10. You've explained the first two really well. Case control studies, according to this article, another type of observational study that follows two groups of otherwise matched people aside from the risk factor of interest. The risk factor of interest here is artificial sweetener intake. Yes?
That's right.
So I guess a little bit more controlled than prospective cohort studies.
Yeah, that's right.
But I guess the downside is you probably don't have as many people on average in those cohorts because you have to hand select them and control for all of these different things. The only one out of these three types of studies that gives you a more causal connection between risk factor and health is the randomized control.
That's right.
They looked at all of these different studies and concluded a few things. The first thing they concluded, there was a slight decrease in weight for those who are taking artificial sweeteners, but it's not dramatic. It's like less than a kilo on average.
Not a huge difference.
With a large or reasonable amount of variation within that less than 1 kilogram weight loss difference. All of the other studies are not definitive in terms of the benefit they may have, but in terms of the negative downsides that taking artificial sweeteners over a long period of time, I think there was more significant findings. You can pretty much be at high risk of obesity and diabetes if you intake artificial sweeteners regularly. Even if it's to replace sugar, your risk factors don't necessarily go down.
Yeah, that's right.
So this kind of confirms what we suspected, or what I suspected, that there is actually a cost that we're paying. Fun cannot be for free in this world. Yeah. And artificial sweeteners can actually be insanely sweet to the taste bud.
A lot of them are hundreds of times sweeter than sugar. They were still saying that there's benefits for people with diabetes to be using artificial sweeteners where they need to. For diabetics within the study, that it wasn't affecting them in the same way.
Yes, they say this recommendation where you shouldn't use artificial sweeteners in place of sugar for health and weight loss does not extend towards people with diabetes because that's a separate category, and it's not universal to say, hey, if you're diabetic, then go nuts to artificial sweeteners. It's more, if you're diabetic, then a more nuanced
Yeah.
case-by-case recommendation from your doctor is more appropriate. I'm Jack.
And I'm Amanda.
Hope to connect with you again next time around.